Welcome back to Digital Marketing Masters. I'm your host, Matt Rouse, and today we don't have a guest. I recently have done several both in-person and online trainings of AI for work and employment. And essentially, this is a beginner's guide to using AI in your work or your business. And if you are familiar with kind of using, ChatGPT, maybe some generative tools, this could be a good refresher for you. There's also a little bit of other information about how AIs are trained and how those systems work and kind of where all the money that they think is going to come from is actually going to come from. So we'll get started here in just 1 second.
For an introduction to AI for work and business, for beginners or as a refresher,
and find out ways you can use AI.
with your host Matt Rouse
Episode 280.
on the Digital Marketing Masters podcast.
Episode 280.
Now on with the show.
All right. So we're back. And I think the first thing that we want to go over is who I am. And for those of you who've listened, on and off maybe, or all the time for the last 8 years that we've been doing this show, you have probably a pretty good idea. But I'm the co-founder of Hook Digital Marketing. I'm the author of 8 business books, 2 of them about AI. Will AI Take My Job? And Will AI Take My Job 2? Which I also just updated about 6 weeks ago. So you can get a copy and it's up to date. And I'm the host of the Digital Marketing Masters podcast. I'm a homesteader in Nova Scotia. I live in a county called Annapolis, and I have a 10-year-old human daughter. My wife Carrie. We got 2 cats, a dog, and 46 chickens, and 48 eggs in the incubator. So soon to be more chickens. I think one thing when it comes to things like employment and work and stuff like that, I really like the last time I did this was in Yarmouth, Nova Scotia for Nova Scotia Works. And that is a group that helps people either find employment or work on their kind of businesses and side businesses and their skills for those businesses. And so we're going to go over like some ways to kind of build some comfort with using new technologies, some terms, why employers are valuing AI literacy. We're going to go over chatbots, conversational AI, generative AI for images, audio, and video, some AI-based tools, talk a little bit about AI agents and automation. And, if you are watching this, then you will see kind of a breakdown of time. And that's not the actual timeline. That's like when we're in person, hands-on doing a workshop, answering questions. This actual run through is not going to take nearly 3 hours. So it's much shorter than that. I think fundamentals of how AI works, this is an oversimplification, of course, because we don't have time to get into the whole thing. But basically, we take a lot of data. And when I say a lot, we'll get into how much is a lot. And that data is used for training. And training is what essentially makes what we'll call the neurons. Usually they're called parameters in AI. Those are like the brain neurons, and the training data trains those neurons and those pathways that make the system able to actually think. And it correlates information. That's how it puts output. And then there's a post-training system, and post-training is actual information or software that the AI has, and then it has the ability to make an output. There is another layer in there of kind of tooling layer, which would be like if I want my AI system to be able to correctly do math, then I would give it a calculator program. If I want it to, be able to analyze a document, then I need a program for that. So there's another tooling layer in there, but we're not really going to cover that. So training data, a lot of it is like a lot of data that is very similar. And if we're talking about something Like that's like ChatGPT and things like that are trained on tons of text as well as other stuff if they're multimodal, which means like they can understand images or video or something. But like an image model, say a program like Midjourney or something, what they're doing is they're showing you like millions of images of cats, for example. Yeah, it kind of correlates all of those things and says how far apart are ears a cat, like what does the cat's face look like, and how does its body work, how's its tail, all that kind of stuff. And then they showed a bunch of other pictures that are sort of similar, but they're not a cat. And they have the system trying to determine if it's a cat or not, and then they tell if it's right or wrong. If it gets it right, there is a reward mechanism, which essentially is like a circuit saying, oh, you've done it. Here's a little bit of like the human equivalent of like a little bit of dopamine. Yeah, you got the answer right. Here you go. You're happy. But modern AI systems need a lot of data. And people ask, well, how much is a lot? GPT-5 is trained on approximately 70 trillion tokens, which is about 281 terabytes of data. If we convert all that into actual words, then if you read 250 words a minute, reading those 52.5 trillion words would take 400,000 years of nonstop reading. So 24 hours a day for 400,000 years, that's how long it would take to read all the data. And then additionally, there is something called synthetic data, which is AI models coming up with data to train the AI models. And then there's also code, multimedia, audio, all kinds of other code that goes into these systems. So we're talking about tons of data, like every encyclopedia, every book ever written, the entire internet, that kind of thing. And AI systems run on tokens. Tokens are essentially like a symbol, a syllable. It could be just a single character, like a number. And those tokens are how the system communicates inside, like internally in the software. And so you can usually say, 70% of the number of tokens is roughly the number of words. So if something is going to be 100,000 tokens, it's 70,000 words. And the more tokens you give a system, the more that it can kind of spend those tokens on thinking. And there's input tokens, there's thinking tokens, and there's output tokens. And I know it's a bit confusing, but the easiest way to think about it is the input tokens you pay for, the output tokens you pay for. So if you're writing a piece of software or using a program where you got to put your ChatGPT API key or your Claude API key in, you pay based on 1,000,000 tokens. So if we do the 70% rule, every 700,000 words is like $15 or $5 or, it depends on the model. There's also a different price for input tokens versus output tokens. So that's a good thing to check on. It's a lot cheaper for input tokens than output tokens. So if you put a novel into a system and have it spit back out a few pages, it's probably 1/3 of the price of putting in a few pages of information and having it spit out a novel. So output tokens cost more than input tokens, but essentially all AI systems run on these tokens. So a lot of people say, well, everybody's going broke in the AI world, they're running out of money and yada, yada, yada. But that's because they don't really know where the money is generated. So everybody thinks that paying the subscription fee for ChatGPT is where all the money is, but probably, 10, 20, who knows how many times that amount of money is used through the API, which is an application programming interface. So if you're using something like Salesforce or you're using like any SaaS program and it has an AI function, that function, they don't make their own AI. That goes through an API, an application programming interface, to another AI, sends them data, tokens are used, they send back information, and then they pay for those tokens. And the reason everybody thinks they're going broke is because they're making these massive investments in data centers and chips and compute and all this stuff. And the reason that they're doing that is that it takes about 2 years to 3 years to get the amount of, they call it compute, which is basically computing power, to get the amount of computing power that they need built in the future. So they got to pay for it now, and they have to try to estimate how much they're going to need 2 and 3 years from now. So if the current kind of hockey stick growth of AI continues, they're going to need, 10 times the compute next year and another 10 times the following year and another 10 times. So now we're at 1,000 times the compute of what they're using this year. But they also, if you order too much compute, you go broke. You order not enough, then you can't make any money. So there's this kind of investment game where they're trying to figure out how much demand there is going to be for their service and at what cost. Because once they train the model, which is the expensive part, using the model is relatively inexpensive, and that's where they make profit. So companies basically paying for tokens is how AI's companies make money. And that's why people think they're going broke, is because they're spending tons of money and not earning that amount of money now. That's because they have to invest in future compute. By 2030, it is estimated that AI companies will have revenue of about $4 trillion. And that does sound like an absurd amount of money, considering probably the top 3 companies in the world together are worth $4 trillion. But the thing you have to think about here is, where do they think that revenue is going to come from? And not all of that is generating new wonderful things. $4 trillion is roughly 10% of the entire world's labor market, meaning if you combined all the salaries of every worker on the planet, 10% of that is $4 trillion. So I think we can all estimate of where that revenue is going to come from, or at least some of that revenue is going to come from, would be the labor market. So I think now that we know a bit more about AI and, that it's not going away anytime soon, there's a good chance that trillions of dollars will be spent on it, and it's also going to displace at least a portion of the labor market, if not a lot of it in some areas. It depends where you work. If you want to find out more about that, you can always get my book, Will AI Take My Job Too? You can get it on Amazon. And so I think when we talk about skills that are in demand right now, or skills that are useful for your business, I think you need to know 5 things, essentially. Let's say 6 if we really want to push it. You need to know how to properly prompt an AI chatbot. You need to know how to generate an image, and hopefully to also edit that image. You need to know how to upload documents or data into a system. You need to be able to use computer vision. You need to be able to know how to do research and studying and kind of deep research tasks. And you also, for number 6 is, let's call this the bonus one, you need to know how to create software on demand. So we're going to go through them one at a time. I think the first thing is, how do you prompt an AI system? And the example that I used when I was teaching this in Yarmouth is that I'm creating a presentation for Nova Scotia Works to teach people how to use AI for work. I am making it in Canva. So that portion is context. I'm giving the system context around what it is that I'm doing. And then the next one is, I want you to create a background for the slide, leaving the center area light colored so the text will show up. I'm telling it what I want it to do, and I'm putting like a little bit of constraint on it, right? I want it light colored, so don't use other colors. I want the center area light colored. And then for additional information, I put, do not put text in the slide background image. It should use Nova Scotia Works colors, make it snazzy. And I used Meta AI for this, but you can use pretty much any AI that will generate images. I just wanted to give them some examples and ones that they can use for free since, they're trying to build a business. I know a lot of people are kind of used to the idea of giving an AI chatbot a role and then asking it a question. And I think there's two big problems with how people prompt AI systems. Number one is they have one way that they prompt the system and they use it for everything, which there should actually be different ways to prompt it based on different tasks that you're doing. The other thing is that people forget a couple of the important bits, which are context and constraints. So if you want kind of a general rule for prompting your chatbot, you say, I want you to act as whatever the role is. So I want you to act as a poet. I want you to act as a professional book editor for fiction books. I want you to work as this. I want you to be a data analyst, whatever the role is. The idea of that is you're telling it where in its, AI computer brain it's going to be thinking from. And then I want you to do some kind of task, right? That could be write me a limerick, help me with some software, analyze this data, yada, 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 whatever the thing you want it to do is. The important parts come after this, and these are the parts that everybody forgets. You can say, here is the context, put a colon, and just tell it all the context you have on that task. And don't be scared to put a lot of context in. I know that we've used prompts for, software as well as some of the ones that I kind of reuse for tasks and stuff that could have as many as, with documents and stuff, which we'll get to in a bit, but just in the chatbot itself, sometimes, half a page, maybe even a page of context. I also like the idea of putting the audience is, and then who is the audience. What you're telling it is if the audience is experts or the audience is beginners or, the audience is professional painters or whatever it is, it's gonna generate the output with that in mind. Now, with that in mind, you could put the output should be, and then tell it what format you want it in. Like the output should be a PDF file. The output should be a list, should be a table, should be a story, whatever. And lastly, I would put constraints. And the constraints are the rules that you want it to follow when it does the thing. So this is act as role, do a task. Here's the context. The audience is blank. The output should be format and constraints. Give it the rules. So a simple one here is act as a poet. Write me a short limerick about prompting. The context is to include Nova Scotia Works. The audience is people learning about AI. And the output should be standard poetry format. And the constraint is to keep it under 100 words. And what it gave me was there once was a prompt with some quirks that wandered through digital works. At Nova Scotia Works, they sharpened its perks and taught AI how language works. So it followed, it used the constraints. It's not the best poem ever written, obviously, but it did the task. So another prompting tip is you don't have to write everything into one run-on paragraph. You could put stuff on different lines, which can be helpful. So you can say I need 15 ideas for whatever the goal is, right? I need 15 ideas for my upcoming marketing presentation for my small business. The context is this is the business, these are the customers, this is the situation. The constraints are it's got to be realistic, low cost, executable by a small team. And the output, I want them in a table with columns for the idea, why it could work, the amount of effort it will take, and any risk involved. So that's like a brainstorming prompt. You'll notice on that one, I didn't tell it to use a rule because you don't have to use a rule for everything. Another one is business analysts. So I can say, I want you to analyze the situation like a consultant. You are a business analyst. Your goal is to help me what to do next. Here's the facts around my situation, and I want you to return what matters most, what's uncertain. I want you to give me several options. Give me your best recommendation and tell me the risk of each option. And you could also upload documents or files or supporting information with that. So there's different ways to prompt the AI. And the other thing I think is really important is to remember that you can ask the AI for help prompting it. So you can say, this is the prompt that I have. And, by reading the prompt, you can tell what I'm trying to get you to do. Do you have suggestions for me to improve the prompt to get a better input from you? And it will help you do that. I think that if you're going to use a chatbot also, you don't have to one-shot everything. So if you put all the information in and everything in and you get an output, you feel like you should refine that output. I think what people forget is that just because it wrote something once doesn't mean that if it would write the same thing again, because there's a thing in AI systems called temperature. And temperature is essentially how much randomness is added into the system. So if it writes you a story, gives you an analysis, whatever that is, there is going to be some randomness in the output. So if you want to reduce the amount of randomness, one way to do that through the chatbot is just to ask it to give you more than one response, or open more than one window and ask it the same thing in 3 different windows, or ask it the same thing 3 different ways. You can even take all of the responses you can get from those, put them all into one prompt and say, these are the responses I got from asking these things. Combine these into which you think is the best. So use your judgment, but also don't be afraid to iterate. The only thing you want to worry about is if you're kind of working with it on and on through the same conversation. Eventually, what happens is the context builds up because the system has to keep telling it all the things that you've already had a conversation about. And as that gets to be too much, it starts to lose the plot. And so you might forget what your original task was. It may start to forget about some of the details, or it doesn't think they're as important anymore because you've talked a bunch about something else. And if you're going to have a conversation about like something different than what you were talking about, you should always use a new window for that, right? Open a new chat and start over. Give it fresh context and go from there. Pretty much any AI. The one I used in my example was using Copilot, but any AI system, any modern one, you can upload documents with your prompt. And I think this is probably one of the best use cases for businesses and business people. My favorite example is you get an insurance document and it's like 50 pages long. So upload it to the AI and say, this is the insurance for my business, or, whatever it is for. I want you to let me know if there's anything out of the ordinary, anything that stands out to you. If there's anything about this I should ask my insurance agent about, help me understand this document. Also helps with understanding, if you get legal information, terms of service, all these kind of things, contracts with other companies, you can put them in and say, hey, help me understand this. And also you can say, like if it's a legal document, you can say, if you think this is beyond, my ability to have an understanding, let me know if I should go get legal guidance for this, right? And it can help you, with those kinds of decisions. I think the other thing you want to remember is the more important that the thing is, the more you need to pay attention to it, right? And this goes for input and output, right? So there's, a worry about hallucination, which does happen. It happens more in some cases than others. When it comes to things like data analysis, generally speaking, the hallucination is pretty low nowadays. I haven't run into much in the way of hallucination. I think one of the things that happens with hallucinating is if the system is trying to give you an output basically to please you, right? It's trying to answer your query, but the data doesn't exist or it doesn't have access to it, it will make it up so that it can complete the task. And like an example would be if somebody said, tell me about the 9 books that Matt Rouse wrote, but I've only written 8. Sometimes it's going to give you 8 books. Sometimes it's going to be like, make up the 9th book. And, obviously that's a problem. Most newest systems that you pay for don't have that problem. It is more common in the free models. But as I said, they are getting better. Kind of a rule of thumb, if it's life and death, you better have yourself and several other human experts check it. If it's you're throwing out a post on LinkedIn or something, you're having it help you put a summary in of what you wanted to say and have it format it for you. It's not the end of the world, right? If something you post out on LinkedIn maybe isn't perfect, but you still want to keep an eye on it anyway. There is kind of a tendency for people to have like the AI is correct 10 times in a row, so they don't check it the next 10 times. But the error rate might be 1 in 1,000. So you don't know which one of those 1,000 are going to have the error in it. Another trick is you can take the output of your AI, put it into a different AI, and add it check to see if it agrees. So this example that I used here is our company has, and we thought of this years ago. It's kind of a funny thing. Now lots of people have done it, but we had some early AIs write a romance novel, and it was a romance novel about an AI, and it's called Circuits of Desire. It's kind of comical, but anyway, what we did is we used it to test the creative writing ability. But I took that document and I uploaded it into the AI chatbot, and I said, I want you to give me a summary of the document and the characters. And I just uploaded like a Word doc, and it was able to give me, here's a summary of chapter 1. Here's all the characters that were mentioned with a description of each, all the locations mentioned with a description of each. And I checked it because I've, read the book that we were working on, and, it's correct. So, I mean, from a data analysis standpoint, I could not read 3 chapters of a book and pick out 1 chapter and then to summarize it and pull all this data out, check it for accuracy would have taken hours. And, Copilot did it in about 4 to 5 seconds. One thing that I think is highly overlooked is computer vision. So the example I used in my talk was a picture of an oil burning water heater. And the reason I use that example is that the old house that I live in has a oil burning hot water heater, which I hope to replace soon. But aside from that, what happened was it stopped making hot water. And so I had to figure out how to solve this problem. And what I did is I took a picture of it and then I uploaded it to ChatGPT, and I said, do you know what this is? And it gave me some information. Like in the example that I used in my presentation, I just actually grabbed a picture off the internet to use. And not only did it figure out all the components of the system and what the unit does, there was also like handwriting on part of the box. And it read the handwriting that said reset 1 time only, and then explained that you only want to reset it 1 time because if the burner fails to ignite, pressing the reset button pumps more oil into the combustion chamber. And if you do it too many times, you can have a fire hazard or like a kind of puff back, like a tiny oil explosion of soot that shoots out of the machine. So it actually read the warning that was handwritten on the machine and then explained it. In my case, when I did it with my boiler, I took the cover of the box off, I took a picture of it, and I said, where is the thing that I used to check to see if there's oil coming to it? And it explained, okay, it's this model, it's this year. I went and double checked that because I know safety first, right? And it was correct. And, it said to turn this thing. So basically, I followed the troubleshooting steps that it gave me and I was able to get it working. Another time I was with a friend who had a camper and they essentially like blew a circuit breaker, but we checked all the circuit breakers and they were all still fine. But we still couldn't get power out of this one outlet. And we thought maybe there's a switchable outlet somewhere, which we did find. We said hit the reset, it still didn't do it. So I pulled out my phone, I took a picture of the outlet, and I took a picture of the make and model for the camper, and it told me that underneath the sink in the bathroom, there's probably another switchable outlet, which I pushed the button, solved the problem. Right. So you can also use things like screenshots. So if you're working in a piece of software, especially something that's a little convoluted, one I like to use is MailChimp. There are stuff in MailChimp that's super hard to find because I don't know why their UX is so bad still, but it is. So you can take a screenshot and you can be like, where do I find the workflow section? And it'll tell you where to click to go find that. And it'll explain how to do whatever the job that you're trying to do is. And you can, as you go through that job on the computer, you could keep uploading screenshots into it. And it'll say, okay, well, you've gotten here. Now you need to do this. And I can be like, okay, well, I did this, but then I pushed this and it didn't work, or the button's grayed out. And it'll say, here's 3 reasons why the button's grayed out. And, so you can work your way through by uploading screenshots and chatting with your chatbot, and it'll teach you how to use the software that you're, having problems with. One more thing that I really like that you should try out if you have not is called NotebookLM, and it stands for Notebook Learning Model, I believe. NotebookLM is free. You could use it on Google. It is also connected with Gemini, which is Google's AI chatbot. And the best thing about it is you can give it a website. You can have it go out and do research on its own. You can mix and match. You can put in notes, plus upload documents, plus have it do research. So you could basically load it up with information on a topic. And then there's a bunch of options that you can do with that information. You could, get an audio overview, a slide deck, a video overview, a mind map. You can have it generate reports. You can generate flashcards. It can quiz you on it. It can make an infographic. It can make data tables. All of this is in there and it's all free. And my favorites are the audio overview, which essentially makes a podcast it can have one or multiple speakers talking back and forth. And it also has this super creepy thing that you can do that's kind of fun, where you can click on a button and you can ask it questions like you're calling into a radio show, and it will change the voices and the show on the fly. So that's something worth trying out. Also, it makes great overview videos. So you could, I pumped my book in, I made a quick kind of overview video, and then I sent it to someone whose podcast I was going to be on because I knew that they hadn't had a chance to read the book yet. So I was able to give them an overview of what my book's about in a little 5-minute video instead of them having to read, 250-page book first. Lastly, and this is, like I said, this is for bonus points, right? I think everybody at this point is sort of vibe coding. And I think there's a couple differences between vibe coding and kind of simple software on the fly, which I call on-demand software. So a good example is in Claude, right in just the Claude interface. I didn't use Claude code or any of this kind of stuff. I said, I want you to write me a program that will tell me when my car is paid off with a form for me to input the info. And in about a minute and a half, it generated this form. It was running in the browser, and it had current balance, interest rate, monthly payment, and any extra monthly payments. And I was able to type in the information and have it give me a payoff date for my imaginary car payment that I don't have. And it also gave me a balance breakdown over time about how much balance versus interest I had. and it told me when the halfway point was. All of this was written from that single one sentence prompt into a working, functioning piece of software that I can use. And when you think about vibe coding is more like I want to build an application that's like a web-based application or a website type application that I could use repeatedly, or maybe even have other people use. And that's more like you're building a website or you're building a web application. Um, and this is like on-demand kind of small software and scripts. There are some other tools out there, like Sim Theory is one. You can use Cloud Code or Codex, where you can write software that will run in the browser that you can securely run yourself, that you don't have to share with anyone else. And it's not shared with anyone by default. And so you can make things like an application to maybe help you manage your own money, or, with some kind of internal business task that you need. Or you can maybe write a script that you would then export and upload to a web server or use on a computer, where you could download the file to your computer and then you could share with your other employees. They could use the same software that you're using. So software on demand is something where, as long as it's not production software, like you're not putting it out to the public, you probably don't need a software developer to do most of this stuff. Where you do need a software developer is if you're going to have public facing software, or software that connects to other systems, especially stuff like finance data or customer data. And you need to ensure that it's secure, and also to ensure that it's not going to like F up all of your customer data, right? If you don't understand cybersecurity, at least basics, you should not be making production software. You can make software as like a prototype, and then have your company's developers, or go pay a development company to take a look at it and review your code and fix any problems with it. But I think, to be safe, you don't want to release production code if you're vibe coding, at least not in the state it currently is. That's up to you. Do what you like. I'm just saying, in my experience, that's a poor idea. So that is how to prompt an AI chatbot, how to get better at prompting, having the AI chatbot help you with your own prompts, generating images. There's lots of information to find out online about generating images, consistent characters, how to make things more realistic, which image generators are better at generating images versus text versus, combinations of those things. All that information is easily found online. You should be able to upload documents and be able to, use analysis and stuff like that from the data that's in those documents, as well as, change document formats and stuff like that. Like uploading, actually, something I do commonly is I take screenshot, I upload it, and I guess this is more computer vision, but it's something that you can't copy the text, but you need to copy and paste that text somewhere. Take a screenshot, load it in, and say, what does this text say? And it'll spit it out to you, and you can copy and paste it. Computer vision's great for solving problems, real world problems, getting feedback on, mechanical things, or also using screenshots, so figuring out software and other types of problems. Lots of ways to use computer vision. I think super underutilized. Research and study notes using, we didn't talk about deep research systems, but you can click the thinking version of your AI chatbot if you pay for it, or the deep research kind of setting on it if you have one, and you can have it go use more tokens to try and do more research for you. And I think NotebookLM is something everybody should try out just to see it, because I use it all the time. It's super useful. And then the last is the idea of software on demand. And that's, generating small scripts and lightweight pieces of software you can use internally, as well as all the way up to your vibe coding, an MVP of, software that you want to test out. Or, if you're using it for investor meetings or something like that, you can say, hey, we've generated an MVP, go around, play with the minimum viable product, see how this works, or to test your own ideas out. all those are great. If you're going to make production software, you should think about, getting a developer. So I think that's about it for now. I think, all these things, this is an overview that is going to help you in the long run. And, if you're fairly familiar with AI already, I hope this is a good refresher for you. And I think we'll leave it at that. Slap like, leave us a review, tell your friends. If you love the podcast, we got some great guests coming up, and we'll see you next week.